Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for making the time today. My name is Jason Katsaftis at Rimini Street. We're going to get started on today's webinar. Today's webinar is scheduled for 45 minutes. We're probably going to have about a half hour of content and then leave time for Q&A. There was some great questions sent in ahead of time, so really appreciate that. And today's topic is talking about the results of the global survey we did of EBS customers in early 2020 and some of the results of those to help you understand what some of your peers are seeing and doing and how they're adapting to some things that have changed with Oracle's roadmap for EBS and how they handle support for EBS. So my role at Rimini Street is I lead our product marketing for Oracle applications as well as our cloud solutions and our cloud advisory services. Many of you on this call today have probably heard of Rimini Street. Maybe you've talked to us in the past. Some of you may have not. You know, for those who haven't, we're the world's leading provider of third-party support for Oracle and SAP applications, as well as leading databases such as Oracle, SQL Server, and others, and the Oracle middleware stack. Our clients pay 50% less in annual support than they pay Oracle today and receive a more comprehensive and responsive support in addition. And I'll give some examples of this a little bit later as we go through some of the results. So the background to this survey, you know, we do these surveys every couple of years because we want to take a moment to reach out, although we talk to, you know, hundreds or thousands of EBS customers every year across the world. We like to go out and ask a set of common questions to understand what they're seeing and what they're hearing and what they're thinking. And, you know, the premise behind this survey was really over the last 18 to 24 months, Oracle's made some major changes in how they deliver support and software for EBS today. And the first thing to look at always is, if you're an Oracle EBS customer, is Oracle's Lifetime Support Policy Guide. This is a document that's publicly available on the web, on their website. They update it about every other month. And this gives you a roadmap for what level of support your releases are in today and what level of support they will fall into in the future. This is a very important document to keep up to speed on. Right now, if you look at this document, it's very interesting. Every Oracle EBS release prior to release 12.1 is no longer fully supported by Oracle. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means. And EBS 12.1 itself will no longer be fully supported by Oracle by December of next year. So we're having more and more conversations with a lot of companies that are running EBS 12.1, trying to get prepared for how they're going to handle this diminished level of support that will happen at the end of next year. The other thing that caught a lot of EBS customers by surprise was Oracle stated there will not be a 12.3 on their roadmap. And this left a lot of companies with questions about what is actually in the future of Oracle's roadmap for EBS. So along the lines of sustaining support, and here's an actual view, recreated view from the Oracle Lifetime Support Policy Guide. You can see from EBS 12 and all the releases above it, all of those have fallen into sustaining support right now. And obviously you can see the deadline here for 12.1, EBS 12.1 happening next December. The important thing to understand with sustaining support is that in the Oracle's own language in their document, you're no longer fully supported once you're running releases in this mode from Oracle. And there's some specific things that you lose access to that are very, very important to understand. For example, you lose access to new tax, legal, and regulatory updates. This can impact your compliance. You no longer receive new critical patches, new fixes, new security alerts. You also may have diminished response time for critical Sev 1 issues. So as you've been running your EBS systems for a while and they may be supporting critical parts of the business, it's very important to understand the risks of falling out of this level of support. So what we've seen, you know, if we step back and look at how Oracle's driving their roadmap forward, and this was really a premise of our survey, is we see Oracle leveraging the support policies to, in essence, dictate to customers when and how they change or update their EBS software. You know, the first thing is that they're trying to move all customers to the latest release, which is 12.2, by the end of next year, or they'll lose access to full support. Once you're on 12.2, however, the process by which you get updates from Oracle changes a little bit. Given there's no 12.3 upgrade, a lot of customers are thinking, well, okay, great, I've made it to Premier support, I'm kind of done. And that's not the case. What happens is you get updates every year from Oracle from that point forward that you have to apply those updates to keep access to full support, even if those updates don't have any features in them that your business may need. And then finally, with no 12.3 on the roadmap, really the only major destination left for EBS customers on Oracle's roadmap is Oracle's cloud. And even though Oracle has stated publicly, customers that migrate EBS to Oracle SaaS, for example, will pay 3 times more. They've said this obviously in the context of their investor relations meetings. This may not be in the best interest of your business right now, and it may not be the right choice for you. So we wanted to explore these kind of topics in a little bit more detail and start with understanding, what releases people are on today, because that's really the first thing that helps you understand where you may need to go in the future. So if you could take a quick second and just identify what releases you run today. And by the way, you can select more than one. And many companies actually do run more than one, as I'll show in a second. And then we'll take a minute after the next slide and we'll look at some of the results from this. Okay. So the background of the survey, we surveyed over 200 companies globally for Oracle EBS across North America, EMEA, and Asia Pacific. We had a really good balance in terms of job function, where there was a healthy amount of people that are in charge of managing the applications and the databases and the middleware on a daily basis, as well as the IT leadership that's looking after the roadmap and the future of the company. And the other thing, first thing that we found from this survey that was very interesting is very few companies run one release of EBS today. In fact, the majority run a combination of releases, including a lot running releases that are already no longer fully supported today. And you can see a large amount running 12.1 right now, which will be facing that decision by the end of December of 2021. And then an increasing amount having upgraded to 12.2, but still a pretty low number considering how long 12.2 has been available in the market. So, the first thing that this survey told us is there's a lot of organizations that have decided their current release, is really the right fit for them, and they've been running that release for a while. So here's the results of the survey we just did. Very interesting. So a lot of people right now are sitting on that 12.1 release. And so I think the content we'll talk about here today a little bit would be very relevant for you. And you're probably already thinking about, what you're going to do next year for that 12.1 release. Okay, so the survey itself, when you read it and go through it, it breaks down into 5 key insights that we were able to gather from this survey. The first thing we wanted to do was just understand, given most companies are running a combination of releases, some of which are fully supported, some of which are not, overall, what's their view on those releases' ability to meet their business needs? And not surprisingly, nearly all of the respondents said that their current release meets most or all of their business needs. This is something we see at Rimini Street all the time. It was one of the reasons why the company was founded. We felt like organizations should be able to run their releases, for 15 years or more without having to upgrade or update to keep support. It's one of the benefits you get from Rimini Street. And this survey is really validating that a lot of companies, while they might have different releases, they're there for a reason, and they're probably well suited and maybe even customized to their business for that need. But the other question we wanted to ask is, okay, if you're on those releases and they're meeting your business needs, how is the Oracle support that you're getting today? And there were some frustrations in here that were very consistent with what we've seen in prior surveys around the cost of maintenance and support. And I know there were some questions in this I'll get to. But also beyond the cost, which is pretty well known, is the time to respond to issues, and then the need to escalate, which is often put as a burden on you, the customer, to get to the right expertise to solve your problem. And this is, again, something that at Rimini Street we've tried to really work hard to make better. One of the things we announced this year was an artificial intelligence platform that we use to immediately assign resources to your problem automatically without you having to escalate it, right? And do that at a global level. So, not surprising to see these frustrations, but good to see, good to get some renewed validation of the fact that current releases meet business needs. So the next thing we wanted to do is look at those individual releases and understand, depending on what release you're on today, how many companies are thinking of upgrading and why they're thinking of upgrading. So the first group of people that we dug into a little bit were all the people running EBS 12.0 or earlier, those releases that are currently no longer fully supported by Oracle. And we just simply asked, do you have any plans to upgrade today? And right now, only 40% have definitive plans to upgrade. The majority were either still evaluating it or didn't have any plans to upgrade at the time. But perhaps what was more interesting is when we asked why they were going to upgrade, the primary drivers were really support related. They were not to deploy new features or functional enhancements. Only 15%, which is a very low number, felt that the value and enhancements in 12.2 were the driver to upgrade. And though this is, again, one of the points we make is you should not be having to upgrade for support reasons. You should be upgrading only if there's really measurable business value in that next release to your company. There's incremental features above and beyond what you have, that are going to move the needle, cutting costs or driving revenue for you. And right now, at least according to these survey respondents, the majority didn't see that in 12.2, even though 12.2 has been out for a very, very long time. The other thing we wanted to ask is, a lot of companies that are on these older releases have also, given the releases are not changing, we were asked, are you actually using AMS today to manage the system for you? Or have you gone to application management services providers outside of your company, to take over the daily operations? And 68% said yes, they're actually starting to use AMS for some or all of their applications. And this makes a lot of sense because if your application itself isn't really changing, you're not getting updates from the vendor, many companies are starting to think about redeploying their people to other things and using an AMS vendor to take over the daily operations. Rimini Street has made available now AMS for EBS as an example. So we can not only handle and take over the support, but also the AMS for EBS customers running these releases or any of their releases today. So the next section of people, which will apply heavily, I think, to this audience, given the survey results, was those people on 12.1, specifically, those running EBS releases 12.1. And so again, we wanted to ask about plans to upgrade. Right now, it was a little surprising. There was a lot of people, still evaluating it, but hadn't yet fully committed to the upgrade, even though it's coming up pretty quickly. And I think one of the opportunities there is if you're hesitant about this, if the value isn't, necessarily apparent for you, or if you were maybe waiting for 12.3, to explore third-party support. And 18% of the respondents here actually said they already plan to move to third-party support, but there's still a large part that are undecided and are evaluating it. The other thing that was interesting is some organizations said that they plan to self-support their EBS environments. And we've heard this a lot in talking to organizations, and there's a couple of things to bear in mind with that that we think are a little bit of a risk, right? The first is, if you're looking at tax, legal, and regulatory updates, for example, how are you going to be able to handle that? One of the things that Rimini Street did recently with COVID-19, we had to produce over 4,500 tax, legal, and regulatory updates in 1 month just for the COVID-19 pandemic, which was a completely unexpected event, right? And so as an organization, if you're planning to go to self-support, have your own people look after things, you want to be careful about that and think about, is allocating your resources the best use of that. So the other question that we asked was, okay, for those people that have gone to 12.2, they've made the upgrade and they're now in this continuous update cycle, how are they seeing the value of the new updates they're getting? Because remember now, there's no 12.3, so they're running the same instance basically moving forward with Oracle support. And they're getting these updates every year in the form of what are called release update packs. So inside these release update packs, there's a combination of fixes, security, and maintenance related items, as well as any features that Oracle's decided or selected to add. So one of the things we wanted to understand is just, when you're applying these update packs today, for what reasons have you been doing it? And deploying new features or functional enhancements was pretty far behind areas like security or fixing functional issues. And again, this is a release that's actually marketed as a continuous innovation release. And this again validates that customers just haven't been seeing a significant amount of new innovation coming. And we actually asked that question specifically. Are you leveraging strong innovation from this release consistently? And only less than half said yes. And again, I think given the cost of upgrading to 12.2 first of all, and then the cost of staying on the 12.2 update cycle, again, doing that for maintenance and security and fixes is not necessary with things like third-party support. You really should be seeing features and functional enhancements as well that help your business. And if you're not, or if you're unsure, I think that's a good reason to do a little bit more due diligence, and we'd be happy to do that for you. We actually went through over 400 of the EBS 12.2 release updates delivered in the update packs and analyzed them one by one very, very carefully and have some good insight on that. But overall, we saw some minor enhancements to existing features, mostly things like tax, legal, and fixes, and very, very few major new features that Oracle's coming out with. And this kind of leads to the last point, which is if there is no 12.3 on the roadmap, a lot of organizations are starting to think about, where and how does the cloud fit in their mix of their EBS strategy. And we wanted to break this into a couple of things, not talk about the cloud generically, but really specifically ask, are you thinking of either taking your EBS instance itself and your license rights that you have and lifting and shifting them onto infrastructure as a service and hosted in the cloud? Or are you thinking of actually replacing EBS and doing a SaaS new implementation, which is a very, very different approach with the cloud? You no longer have your license, you're renting through a web browser basically over the web from the SaaS provider and moving away from having those license rights. So the first thing we found is, over twice as many people that have gone to the cloud have chosen to go IaaS over SaaS. They've chosen to lift and shift what they have versus replace it with SaaS. And we're not surprised about that. I mean, EBS is great software. It's been out for many, many years. Many of you have probably customized it for your business. And, to throw that away in replace of SaaS, there has to be a strong incremental benefit of functionality there. And we just haven't seen that gap closed yet with SaaS providers, being able to basically deliver the same amount of value and functionality you're getting out of your ERP today. But there were some companies that have gone and moved EBS to SaaS. So another question we asked is, when they do go to SaaS, are they absorbing Oracle SaaS only, or are they using multiple best-of-breed providers? And 70% are using a best-of-breed approach. So this is also very telling. When they have gone SaaS, they haven't been able to fully replace the value of what they have with Oracle SaaS products. They're having to go out and look at other solutions and put together, a best-of-breed strategy, which on the one hand is good because they're going out and getting the best functionality they think they need. But on the other hand, now you've got 2 or 3 vendors that you're managing in the cloud, and there's complexity and cost that comes with that as well. So we'd love to know, our second and final poll question, what are some of your plans around your EBS implementation? For example, keep running your current releases. Are you planning to upgrade to the latest release? Are you planning to move to the cloud? Some of you might even be planning to move off of EBS. We've had those conversations as well, and would love to see some of your plans around your roadmap. Okay, so about 50-50 split, running what you have today versus upgrading. Very consistent with what we've seen. And again, a lot of this could be due to the fact that you might run multiple releases today, some of which you want to keep running what you have, and some of which you may want to move to the latest release as well. So thank you very much for the responses on those. And so when you think about the roadmap moving forward for EBS right now, and what some of your peers are doing and have they said across the globe right now, it's very consistent what Oracle's roadmap is about for EBS. You know, they've been for years, as you can see in the lifetime support policy chart, moving you through upgrades, basically dictated by the end of full support. But that's about to end at the end of next year, where there is no 12.3 coming, and those final EBS 12.1 releases have to make a decision about upgrading or not. But after that, there's really just a path of updates into Oracle's cloud. We don't see a whole lot, you know, coming from Oracle for traditional EBS releases, as we've pointed out. And some of those that have evaluated or moved to 12.2 are validating that perspective. You know, it's been more about, you know, applying updates for maintenance reasons, not for features and value. So, you know, Rimini Street's approach is very, very different. I mean, first of all, I want to point out that if you look at this, you can start and finish in the same area as Oracle in their roadmap. You know, you can start with your releases you have now, and you can end in the cloud. There's nothing different about that when you come to Rimini Street, except you get more choice about when and how you make those shifts, and you're saving up to 90% on your maintenance and support along the way. So we have clients, and I'll give a couple of examples here next, which is, you know, after they've moved to Rimini Street, they've been able to deploy more users, add more licenses, fund other priorities, take advantage of AMS, and still go to the cloud that they choose when they want. But they haven't had to make those decisions prematurely or in a manner that's dictated by vendor support policies. We really think that isn't necessary, and that control should be put in your hands. And that's why we call it a business-driven roadmap. It should be driven by the needs of your business. So one of our great client examples for EBS, which is on RiminiStreet.com, is Welch's. Welch's is a very well-known brand name in beveraging and food manufacturing. And their CIO not only did a reference story with us, but wrote a really nice blog in his own language about this. You know, and the way he looked at his business is he said, look, I need to be able to justify what I'm doing to the average farmer, right? The people that are out there working on our behalf. And they were facing an upgrade like many of you may be with 12.1. And even though they were on 11.5.10 at the time, it was the same concept. They had a forced upgrade event, and they weren't ready to do the upgrade. So they came to Rimini Street to avoid the upgrade now, but still have the ability to do it later. And the other thing they realized, they were spending about 15% of their entire budget just on maintenance and support, which is a heavy amount for them. And they wanted to get some savings there. And after they moved EBS, they eventually moved the database and the middleware to our support as well, while getting tax, legal, and regulatory updates delivered from Rimini Street. And, you know, probably the most important thing about this story is, you know, there's a change, right? When you go from Oracle support to Rimini Street support, it's a different support vendor. And, you know, when he talked to his team about how they felt about the shift, in his words, they would never want to go back. The difference in responsiveness and not having to chase down tickets and manage the reactive issues of support really changed their daily approach to their jobs, and they would not want to return. And I think that's a really important thing as you explore this within your own organizations. It's not just the savings and the ability to avoid upgrades and things like that. It's making your teams have more time to go do other things that they may want to do for the business. And Atkins is another great example. Atkins, like Welch's, was facing a forced upgrade, but they had also, you know, spent a lot of time looking at the future of the EBS roadmap. And, you know, in their own words in the story, they basically said, you know, it was pretty obvious to us there wasn't a lot of investment being put in 12.2. Most of the investment was being put into Oracle's cloud apps. And they weren't ready to go to the Oracle cloud apps yet. So they came to Rimini Street. They got, you know, not only support for their releases, but their customizations. This was a huge pain point for them. They had a lot of custom code that wasn't supported by the vendor and is supported by Rimini Street. And so after that for a period of time, though, they did eventually decide to make the move to the cloud and did make the move to SaaS for certain workloads. So they moved, payroll, for example, and talent management and other things to cloud SaaS, but kept some of their EBS in the data center and then innovated around it by adding analytics to their solution. So this is some examples of all the different ways third-party support's used and the flexibility it can provide you. So I wanted to leave some time, as I mentioned, we're at the half-hour mark, leave about 15 minutes for questions, and I saw some come in live on the chat as well. And then the other thing I wanted to mention in closing is the survey and other assets will be made available for you that you can use and share. So let's take some time to get to the Q&A and talk about, how Rimini Street can help answer those. One of the questions that came in live was, it says Oracle's not very transparent on security-related upgrades. Most of the time, Oracle's security upgrades are reactive, not proactive. How should customers proceed with Oracle to address this issue? This is a great question. So, as we all know, Oracle EBS relies on the Oracle database, and Oracle does provide critical patch updates for the system. Now, one of the challenges we've seen is, first of all, when it comes to securing your environment, critical patches are just a piece of the puzzle, and they're very limited, and they're a very kind of older traditional way of doing it. There are much more comprehensive and modern approaches to this. Rimini Street actually delivers advanced security solutions for database and middleware that use a virtual patching approach, which essentially allows you to protect the system at a higher level and preempt attacks before they come, and also not have to involve downtime to apply the patches and updates. And there's much more information we can go into that. There's actually a great asset that you'll have available at the end of this that talks all about the differences in our approach. But you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the challenges with critical patches is they're typically delivered after an issue's been found out. So they're fixing something that has already happened, and then there's a time to deliver the patch, and then there's, of course, the time for you to apply the patch. I think at Oracle at one point had come out and said that their customers are very often about 14 to 18 months behind on critical patches, just because of the disruption of applying them. So, if they're not fixing your issue proactively, and if you're not consistently applying them, yeah, they're really not a complete approach to security. And there are some other great alternatives out there that we can talk to you about to help you with that. So the next question is, how is Premier support for Oracle ERP calculated? So that's a good question, and I think I can interpret that around, the first thing is they have a set schedule for it, and I've talked about that. Typically after a release comes out, Premier support will be offered for a period of time, and then in some cases extended support is offered, which you can pay for, and then you'll move into sustaining support. And the cost of that is typically about 22% per year of your licensing. And as we've seen with the case of EBS, right now, other than 12.1, every release is already in sustaining, and Premier is through the end of next year. A follow-up question to this, though, from a different person that I'll talk to is, would support be extended past December 2021? So the answer on that is Oracle has announced in August, I think, of this year, a thing called market-driven support, which is a temporary and incomplete extension of support for EBS 12.1 that only goes at the most through 2023. So we've looked at this, we've analyzed it, and read Oracle's documentation around this, and can provide you more information offline, absolutely. But to net it out, you have to maintain your current support payment. You have to buy this extra. And the support that you get from the little bit of an extension is not equal to Premier support. It's got nearly a dozen caveats to it, and it's going to leave holes in what you're used to today. And again, it's going to expire. It's going to be temporary. So I think you need to think about, it's good to think about, okay, are we just putting off the inevitable here? What's really our long-term strategy? And we would love to talk to you between now and next December about a better approach than paying a little bit more money just for a temporary extension to their support when it's really not going to be a long-term solution. So the next question was, are other companies migrating to Oracle Financials or planning to stay in the data center? I mean, I think the survey was a great way to look at this. I mean, there are companies moving to Oracle SaaS, but twice as many are choosing to stay, either lifting and shifting to infrastructure as a service right now when they go to the cloud. And again, even those going to Oracle SaaS, for example, are choosing multiple solutions. It's hard to say how many are actually going to Oracle Cloud Financials because of the fact that Oracle today doesn't really report that. The way that they report their revenues for cloud is now been shifted. It's blended in with other things, and you really, as a customer, can't tell, other than what they tell you, how much they're selling in particular areas. So the next question is, how does Rimini Street reduce risk when moving to our support? So this is a great question. You know, when you decide to move to Rimini Street third-party support, there'll be several factors, right? You'll be looking, first of all, at your maintenance end date with the vendor. You know, what does your current contract have as an end date? And then we're going to work back from that timeline. And there's different options within there depending on how much time you have between now and your maintenance end date. But we have a very comprehensive onboarding process behind this. We look at your current releases. We look at where you're trying to go with your roadmap, understand what documentation and software assets and tools you want to bring with you in an archive when you come to Rimini Street, and make sure that we're factoring in, all the other steps that have to happen in terms of getting your team up to speed, setting up secure remote access, enabling tax, legal, and regulatory updates if possible. And we've done this thousands and thousands of times, and it's a very, very easy process to walk through. But it's also able to be customized and tailored to what your specific needs are for your business. And we'd be happy to walk you through that as well. We have a great onboarding team, and the feedback we've gotten from our clients has been the onboarding's been one of the best experiences of moving to Rimini Street. The next question is, should we go to SAP or private or public cloud in 2019? I mean, those are all things that we've seen clients doing. We've seen customers go from Oracle to SAP. We've seen them go public cloud in certain cases for modules that it makes sense, and we've seen them go into the private cloud. I think the question is, what's the best, what are you trying to achieve for your organization? And really make sure that you're getting the best CapEx and OpEx benefits in the short term right now. I think especially going with what's happening in the market and the economy, and that there's tangible value if you're going to make any new investments in new applications and software that are really going to move the needle. EBS right now is a great product, as I mentioned. If you were to come to Rimini Street tomorrow, you would have access to EBS software licensing, including 12.2 and all of the dot releases up till the latest one, which is 12.2.10. You can archive and bring those with you. That's several years of innovation that they've put into the product that you're going to get to continue to leverage and enhance and innovate and customize. The real question is what's left and how much are they putting into that product moving forward, and do you think there's value to stay on that path or go a different direction? And the next question is, we're in the process of upgrading, what is the roadmap after that? And it's a great question. I mean, the first thing with Oracle's roadmap to always remember is it's always subject to change. They publish what they're going to do, but they're under no obligation to deliver that. It may or may not change, and you all know that. But the other thing is, if you look at what they're delivering, and sometimes those features they provide don't apply to your modules, sometimes they don't apply to your industry. You've really got to look at it very, very carefully and not just assume that the value is going to be significant. Our view on the roadmap right now, having looked at, again, 10 releases of 12.2 and talked to many, many customers, we don't see any reason why the trajectory of it's going to change. And that trajectory is there's not enough significant new innovations being delivered that are going to move the needle for most EBS customers that already have this great software. There's just not enough new innovation coming, and really Oracle's been shifting that into their SaaS products. So you really got to think about, is that the direction you want to go? And in the meantime, while you're making that decision, coming to third-party support may help you free up budget and funds to go do other things that you need to do. So great questions, and again, at the end, you're going to have access to not only the survey. There's a client ebook that includes the 2 clients I shared today and many others. There's also a couple of other webinars. We have a webinar about Oracle licensing, and we get into a lot of the things that Oracle will talk to you about and some of the ways to help navigate Oracle licensing policies better. We also have a document about security patches, and then finally a separate webinar specifically focused on 12.1 upgrades. And we would encourage you to look at those. Those are all available on demand. Okay, thanks a lot, everybody. Take care.